Hey, welcome back to Little Green Dog's animation tutorial series. In this episode, we'll learn about the process of creating an animated cartoon, and we'll do it in two parts. The first part is a quick introduction to Moho Pro, the animation program we'll be using to create our storyboard, animatic, and final animation. In the second part, we'll create an animated cartoon from start to finish. By the way, this is not a step-by-step tutorial, and you don't need to have Moho running to follow along. We'll have more time for that in other tutorials. Okay, let's get started. I'll finish this later.
Part 1. Let's meet Moho.
If you watched the introductory video, you know that I used Moho to animate cartoons at DreamWorks Animation. I've been using Moho for a little over 10 years, and it's my favorite way to create cartoons. Let's take a look at Moho's workspace and some of its features. Along the top, we have the familiar menu bar. In Moho, the menus we'll use most often are Draw, Bone, and Animation. I'll talk about the other menus as we need them. The open space in the center is called the working area, and this is where the magic takes place. It is literally the stage where you place characters, props, and backgrounds to create the animation. Moho is generally thought of as a 2D animation program, but the working area is actually a 3D environment, where items can be placed and animated with depth and perspective. On the left side is the Tools window, which contains the tools for drawing, rigging, and animating a scene. The tools are grouped into categories, and depending on what you're doing at the moment, the window will show only the categories relevant to the task. Moho is pretty smart like that. On the right is the Styles window. This is where you set the color and texture properties for the shapes you'll be creating using Moho's vector drawing tools. Besides color and line thickness, the Styles window also lets you apply shading and texture effects. Next to the Styles window is the Layers window, which is kind of like the Layers window in a Paint program, but with options related to animation. Moho supports two types of art layers, vector and image. The vector layer is for artwork creating using Moho's vector drawing tools. The image layer is for artwork created with a Paint program, or a photograph taken with a camera. Other layer types like group, bone, switch, frame-by-frame, particles, and so on have special uses in Moho. I'll talk about each type of layer in separate tutorial videos, and we'll see a few of them in action today. Across the bottom is the Timeline window. This window has three tabbed views: Channels, Sequencer, and Graph Editor. The Channels view is where we set and edit keyframes for our animation, and it's the view we'll be using most of the time. Last, but certainly not least, are the Actions, Switch Selection, and Layer Comps windows, three very powerful features in Moho. We'll learn more about these windows later. Now that we've met Moho, let's see how it's used to make a cartoon.
Part 2. Let's make a cartoon.
I need to know what I'll be animating, so I came up with a very simple story about a cat and an apple tree. I'm calling her Apple Cat because, well, Apple Cat likes apples. First, I wrote what's called a treatment, which is a summary description of the story. Apple Cat sees a giant apple hanging from an apple tree. She wants the apple, but it's too high to reach. Oh no! How will she get it? If this cartoon had a more complicated story, the next step would be to write a script. But because it's only 25 seconds long, and there's no dialogue, we can move on to other things. Next, I work on concept art and designs for our story. Here are my designs for Apple Cat and the apple tree, and a few drawings of Apple Cat doing what apple cats do. Coming up with ideas like this is called pre-production, and it's the first stage of making an animated cartoon. In pre-production, I try out different looks for my characters and the world they live in. I'll also figure out what the props look like, and even which colors to use. If I'm lucky, I'll nail the designs right away. Or I might go through a lot of variations and toss out a lot of things. In pre-production, everything is worth considering, and nothing is precious. It's the time to explore and be creative. After the final designs have been decided, they will be used as a reference for creating the animation. The next step in pre-production is to create the storyboard. A storyboard is like a comic book version of the animation, with each panel depicting part of a scene and a camera angle. A storyboard can be drawn on paper or in any paint program. Today, I'll be drawing the storyboard for Applecat in Moho. To begin, I'll draw my background art in a vector layer. Here's the tree, some apples. Now I'm adding a frame-by-frame layer above the vector layer. The frame-by-frame layer allows me to draw panels for the character in action without having to redraw the background. This is getting boring. Let's speed things up. If you're wondering why Applecat has a boxy Minecraft head instead of the oval shape from the character sheet, it's because it's quicker to draw a box. A good storyboard doesn't need to look pretty. Thumbnail sketching is fine because the storyboard only has to communicate the main idea and direction of a shot, not the tiny details. Details are for the designs we made earlier, and the animation we'll be making later. The storyboard is about the story, and how the scenes are linked together. Okay, that's the last drawing, which means it's time to turn our storyboard into an animatic. An animatic is a storyboard with motion and sound. It's the blueprint for the final animation, so it's important to get the timing, composition, and direction represented accurately. A carefully crafted animatic spares you tons of wasted time and trouble later on. To begin, I need to render out an image sequence. This gives me a separate file for each storyboard panel. Normally, I would import the panels to a video editing program and edit my animatic there. But for this demonstration, we're going to import the panels back into Moho. I'll convert the image sequence layer into a switch layer, which lets me set the animation keyframes for each panel. To edit the timing of a panel, I click on the switch layer keyframe and drag it to the duration I want. For example, I'll be animating this cartoon at 24 frames per second. So, if I want the panel to appear on screen for 1 second, I'll drag the keyframe out to 24 frames. Now I'll import and place audio files for sound effects. Alright, let's see what we've got. Yeah, that works for me. With the animatic completed, we are ready to move into the second stage of making an animated cartoon: production. The production stage is when we create everything that winds up on the final screen. This means backgrounds, props, character puppets, and of course the animation. Everything we create for production is called an asset. Let's create our first asset, the Applecat puppet. In a new Moho project, I imported this character sheet I made during pre-production. This type of character sheet is called a turnaround, and it shows us what the character looks like from different angles. I'll start by drawing Applecat's head. Earlier, I used Moho's freehand tool to draw the storyboard art, but now I'm using Moho's Add Points tool. Add Points lets me draw point by point to create artwork that will bend exactly the way I want for posing in animation. Here, I'm setting up a style palette with colors sampled from the original artwork. Applecat is so cute! Now let's draw the rest of Applecat. I'm drawing the torso and each limb in separate layers. Breaking out the body parts like this will make the character easier to rig and animate. Let's start rigging. First, I'll add a bone layer and drag the body part layers into it. The bone layer is where I can build a skeleton that will be used to pose and animate Applecat. Attaching artwork to bones like this is called binding, and Moho has several binding methods. For Applecat, I'm mainly using the bind points method. Am I going too fast? Yes, I am going very fast. But remember, this tour is only about the process of making a cartoon. We'll learn a lot more about drawing, rigging, and animation later. So for now, like and subscribe, like and subscribe, like and subscribe. Now I'll rig the face. Like the body parts, I'm moving the parts of the face into separate layers to make them easier to rig and animate. Let's work on the eyes. Using the Actions window, I'm creating a smart bone action that opens and closes the eyes. So when I turn this bone dial to the left, Applecat makes sleepy closed eyes, and when I turn it to the right, she makes smiley closed eyes. Now I'm working on a smart bone action for the head. A smart bone action is a dial that lets me control pre-keyframed animations. And now the body turn. When the turning animation is complicated, I like to create one control to turn the body completely around. I call this smart bone body turn loop because the animation is a cycle. Then I'll create a smart bone called body turn that operates the first smart bone in both directions. This way, I only need to create the turning animation once. When the body turn smart bone is completed, I'll shy or hide the body turn loop bone because I don't want to accidentally keyframe this bone during animation. Now let's set up the mouth. Applecat doesn't talk, but she does have an expressive mouth. After I get the mouth poses drawn, I'll convert the mouth group into a switch layer. A switch layer is a special group that can switch between multiple layers. In this case, I'm using it to switch between Applecat's mouth drawings. When I select the switch layer, I can use the Switch Selection window to switch the mouth drawings. Now that Applecat has a skeleton, let's test it. Alright, the Applecat puppet is ready to go. Let's see, what else do we need? Oh yeah, I need background art. I'll paint that in a paint program. If this looks really easy, it's because I made a few custom brushes to help me out. This is also the third time I've painted this tree, so I've had a little practice. I used Procreate to paint this background, but the techniques are the same for any paint program, whether it's Photoshop, Krita, or Clip Studio Paint. We can learn more about painting backgrounds in another tutorial. I'll save the background art as a layered PSD file and switch back to Moho to rig it. In a new project file, I'll import the PSD file and add some bones so I can animate the branches and leaves of the apple tree. Our Applecat assets are completed, and we are finally ready for animation. Yay! Let's make a new project for the animation and import our assets. I've imported Applecat, the Animatic, which I'll use as a guide for placing the assets, and our background art. Now I'm using the Animatic as a guide for posing Applecat. Here I'm drawing and rigging the pants legs. I really should have done this earlier, but it's not too late to fix this. When it's done, I'll save this version of the Applecat rig as my new master rig. As I step through the timeline, I'll pose Applecat and set keyframes to match the pose in the Animatic. I'm also setting the keyframe interpolation mode to step, which tells Moho to hold the poses without in-between drawings. This is called layout or blocking. I have nothing to say for the next minute, so I'll put on some cozy lo-fi music while we watch me animate. The apple tree needs apples. Lots of apples. To make this task easier, I'm making a few variations of the apple to load into Moho's Scatterbrush tool. With the Scatterbrush tool loaded, I can paint dozens of apples with a couple of strokes. I can also use the Scatterbrush to paint the falling mass of apples and the big pile of apples on the ground. To animate this, I'm painting the apples in a frame-by-frame layer. The action happens very quickly, so I only need to paint a couple of frames. Now I'm keyframing the position and rotation of a few single apple layers separately. This simple enhancement makes the limited frame-by-frame animation appear more interesting. To show AppleCat is okay and enjoying her big apple, I'm shifting a few apples at the top of the mound drawing in duplicated frame-by-frame layers. This is made more accessible by setting selection sets that let me select any row of apples from a list. Here's our finished layout pass. If it needs it, I can make final timing adjustments now. That looks good. Let's do our animation pass. Just like we did in the layout pass, we'll work our way through the timeline from the start. But this time, I'll change the keyframe interpolation from step to smooth. Now Moho generates the frames between our key poses. However, this won't automatically make the animation look good. We still need to add extremes and breakdowns. If this terminology is new to you, I'll explain it when we get to our tutorial on animation. Alrighty, we're done. Render our project and see what we've got. And that is the process for making an animated cartoon. Obviously, we still have a lot to learn, and there will be many tutorials coming to cover every tool and technique. Next time, we'll begin learning how to draw in Moho, and then we'll learn all about rigging and how to animate in Moho. For more seasoned Moho users, we'll be posting tutorials on advanced techniques and how to use Moho with other programs. Soon, we'll have something for everyone. So, what topics are you interested in? Let us know in the comments below. I promise you, Mame-chan reads them all.
I really do.
Now, where's that sandwich? Oh, here it is.